Alrighty, so this video is long overdue here on the channel. So for any of you that follow my posts on Reddit, you may see me consistently going on and on and on about self-regulation and the importance of bringing self-regulation techniques and skills into our personal healing path as a central tool that we're going to rely on whenever we need it along the way. So in this video today, I wanted to start to create a sense of what self-regulation is for you, for anyone who doesn't understand the term, who finds it ambiguous, and list off 10 of my favorite self-regulation techniques that I've played with, so that you know what they are and kind of give you a sense of what they are. So then you can go and research and learn these techniques for yourself, play with them, and see if they in some positive way contribute to your sense of balance, well-being, and healing. So without a whole lot of further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get into a quick little explanation of my thoughts about self-regulation, then we'll get into the list here. Okay, so before we go ahead and get into the list of describing the 10 different techniques that I think you should learn and look at closer, I thought I would just kind of give a real quick definition here of what I think self-regulation is from my perspective, and a few of my hot takes as someone who has played with them a bunch, explored all these different techniques for myself, and taught to a bunch of different clients and used in a lot of different scenarios, kind of what I've noticed as I've played with it. So real quick here, just as a definition, what I mean when I'm saying self-regulation is essentially any technique or set of techniques that you might use to kind of manage your physiology and help yourself become regulated when you become dysregulated. So if you get triggered, unbalanced, upset, these are tools and techniques to help you come back to center, might be another way to think about it. Or another way to think about that is to bring yourself back into parasympathetic activation and balance. So when you're in sympathetic, you're in fight or flight, right? You're either spacing out or you're getting angry or triggered in some way. We want to bring the nervous system back to parasympathetic, to grounded, to relaxed, to centered, to easy, to comfortable, to social, right? So everything we're doing here is some form of modulating the nervous system back to parasympathetic mode. So a few of my quick takeaways here, and then we'll go ahead and get into that list. So first of all, I want you to know that self-regulation is probably, in my opinion, the most common missing piece for just about everyone in our society when it comes to maintaining our mental health. It is so radically underknown for how important and how basic, foundational, and essential it really is. So if you're doing any sort of therapeutic work, you are trying to heal issues, you're trying to level up as a person, you're trying to grow, you're trying to push your own growth edge, you're trying to let go of trauma, you're trying to heal your depression, your anxiety, your whatever it is, your social anxiety, your procrastination, what have you. I really think the first place you want to start, particularly if it's something really intense, is start with self-regulation. Get, in my opinion, 2 or 3 good self-regulation techniques under your belt that you know you can rely on and call upon anytime you're feeling out of balance, out of sorts, triggered, upset. And instead of going to your typical coping mechanisms, now you have a healthy way to bring yourself back into that nice, centered, grounded place, right? So absolutely crucial, absolutely missing in our society, and the first port of call, especially if you're doing any sort of trauma work. I believe it was Besser van der Kolk, if I'm not mistaken. I was reading a quote, and he was saying this is step number 1 for anyone doing trauma work. Before you get deep into trauma work, you need to have self-regulation techniques in place. Self-regulation, on that note, is crucial for if you're working on trauma issues, especially and particularly for any of those of you out there who are dealing with complex PTSD. So I realized I put up a video a while back about my own experience of healing complex PTSD and my relationship to psychedelics inside of that whole process and journey. I'm happy to add more information about it if there is more demand here on the channel about it. And if you're dealing with complex PTSD or attachment wounds, I've been very vocal on Reddit, and I just want to say, please learn some self-regulation techniques. Try one of these 10, see if it doesn't work for you. If none of them do, keep digging until you find that tool or technique that really helps you to come back to center. Now, the reason I say that this is so important for people with complex PTSD or attachment issues doing attachment work is because we tend to get really dysregulated all the time. And part of how complex PTSD comes to exist in a person's nervous system as a pattern, as a conditioned response inside of us, is that we have had a lot of these small, habitual, repetitive injuries to our sense of self or our sense of relationship over time throughout our childhood, usually, that kind of add up to a PTSD effect that we're now experiencing and dealing with, right? And so it's kind of this kind of death by 1,000 paper cuts kind of scenario where instead of being one big acute wound, it's lots of small wounds that add up. So I like self-regulation in response to that because it kind of mirrors the way that the problem we're dealing with when we have complex PTSD was created. So if we are consistently correcting our nervous system, helping it to regulate, helping it to balance, helping it to come back to center, anytime we start to get triggered, it really starts to create this supportive momentum over time of our system knowing, oh, I know what to do when I get triggered. It starts to internalize as an automatic response, and it becomes a way that we know we can reliably bring ourselves back to center as we're doing our healing work. Because let's face it, as we're resolving our trauma, we're going to have moments that feel really uncomfortable, that get really triggering, where something really big comes up. And this is so key. It's just so important to be able to meet ourselves at any moment, wherever we are, whatever we're doing, and bring ourselves back into that nice centered place. Another point about self-regulation is that it can be transformative in and of itself. So I get this question a lot. People ask me, yeah, I see you talking about self-regulation. Do you mean just use it as kind of a band-aid, a coping mechanism, a short, comforting resolution that doesn't really heal the issue? Or are you talking about it in terms of resolving the issue? Well, here's my take on that. If you think of whatever the issue is you're dealing with, whether it's depression or anxiety or PTSD response, as not necessarily something in the past, but something that you're currently dealing with now in the present in your body as a habituated pattern in your nervous system. And that's really what the problem is. It's a set of emotions, a set of thoughts, of thought loops, of fixations, of fears, of somatic experiences, right, that have been habituated in. Then using self-regulation can actually be transformative in and of itself if it's done consistently enough and repetitively enough. So the answer is that it's both. I think it's deeply valuable to have just a healthier coping mechanism or healthier kind of way of dealing with when we get triggered. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But also, yeah, if you're consistent and persistent enough with self-regulation, it's something that you can use to actually, in the long term, start to really transform the issue or transform this pattern. Yeah, it's both. And quite frankly, a lot of the ones I'm going to list here come from different schools of trauma therapy. A lot of these are trauma resolution tools as well as being self-regulation tools. So maybe that kind of, speaks for itself there. Last point I want to make here is that there are a ton of videos on YouTube about self-regulation. Probably a lot of you, if this is a new concept or something you have heard me talk about, but you don't know where to look, it's just that you haven't known what terms to look for, where to dig. There's so many different types of therapy out there. I get it. It can be confusing and overwhelming, and you may just not have heard of something. So I want to just say there's a ton of videos out there, but I've also started to compile a playlist on the channel that you can go to right away here and click on and start to learn some of these techniques. I'll be adding more as I go, as I learn more, as I find new techniques, or if I find maybe someone who's just explained it really well. But I try to get up just like a nice chunk of videos so that you have a starting place at least to start to play with some of these techniques. Now, what I tell my clients all the time is that, you should learn a bunch. You should try these out for yourself and see how they feel and how they work for you. Now, in my experience, what I've noticed with self-regulation is that not every technique will work for you. Out of maybe 10, you might find 2 or 3 that are really good and really solid for you and really work. So if that's the case, you now have 2 or 3 different ways that you can bring yourself back to center when you kind of find yourself being triggered, right? So that's a win. I've also found a lot of times that for myself, one technique will work for a while, like maybe for a season, for a couple months, a few months, and then it'll not work so well, oddly enough. And then another technique will kind of work more. So I would encourage you to be flexible, to keep learning these techniques, to keep applying them to yourself. And again, they're there to kind of save you, to bring you back to center, to be self-reliant and emotionally self-contained so that you can start to bring yourself into balance when you feel triggered and dysregulated. And so that, again, you can also start to be rewiring this pattern in the nervous system of whatever it is you're dealing with so that, you're doing corrective work. So enough yammering on here. I'm going to go ahead and switch into this list here, mostly just kind of rattle them off to you, but I'll probably explain a little bit about what each of these are or my take on them. So without further ado, let's get into it. Oh, I forgot to say really quick, by the way, these are all going to be just kind of in no particular order. There's no rank here. I'm not putting any as better or worse in my own personal opinion. They're all kind of equally useful, important tools. It's just a matter of what's going to work for you. Okay, so with that being said, first one on the list here is breath work. Now, breath work is something I have a long history with, coming from my spiritual practices, meditation practices, things like this. And it's something over the years that I've just learned quite a few different examples of in terms of ways to modulate our physiology and bring myself back to center. I think breathwork is one of these tools that cannot be overemphasized for everybody. It's just probably one of the most fundamental levers, if you will, to shift or modulate how we feel in our nervous system, because so much of our brain and our nervous system and our physiology is tied to our breath. So getting comfortable with some form of breath work is really useful. There's a bunch out there, whether it's box breathing, the 6-7-8, the coherence breathing, just as some examples. And I will say this about breath work. In my experience, if you want a really powerful experience with it, obviously there's holotropic breath work as well, which I haven't played with myself, but I've had profound healing experiences from doing like maybe 10 to 20 minutes of a breathwork technique. So I would encourage you to mess with it and sometimes maybe give it a little bit longer. Yes, there are a lot of these that work initially, almost immediately within 30 seconds to a couple minutes. But if you can really pick one and go deep with it for 10 minutes, you might be surprised how powerful of a shift you can get out of it. So breathwork is a great place to start for probably everyone, honestly. Oh, and I forgot to say really quick, breathwork is probably one of our primary tools for navigating psychedelic experiences. So in the context of psychedelics, breathwork is pretty essential. I like to say to my clients and people that there's literally no experience you have on psychedelics that you can't breathe your way through, whether that's a powerfully blissful experience that might just be overwhelming and too much, or whether that is a really sad, traumatic, or overwhelming experience in any sort of way. Breathwork is kind of that thread that will bring you through any of it. So get good with breathing because it's a crucial life skill to have. Enough said. Okay, next on the list is EFT. And I should probably say really quick that, over the course of teaching these to people over the years, I've had clients reject or have issue with or be triggered by even just about every technique on this list. I've had people say they hate breath work, and this is another one that a lot of people don't like EFT or say it doesn't work for them. For those that it does work for, it can be one of the most profound life-changing discoveries to discover EFT and how well it works for bringing yourself back to center or for using to process trauma and move through issues. I have a deeper explanation as to why EFT would work that may not have to do with meridians and the energy system in the body, But long story short, if you're not familiar with emotional freedom technique, EFT tapping, it's definitely a great place to start. It's a good skill to explore and have and play with and try on. It can really work wonders in terms of changing your state. So yeah, check it out if you haven't. Another one that people seem to either totally love or hate is bilateral stimulation. Now, when I'm teaching this to people, I usually teach just some sort of basic form of bilateral stimulation, but you may know it more in terms of the kind of therapy modality connected to it, which is EMDR. So EMDR works on the principle of bilateral stimulation, which is really just simply doing any sort of cross body stimulation so that we're getting both sides of the brain, both hemispheres of the brain activated, because I guess the working understanding is that generally speaking, anxiety, depression, things like this happen in one region of the brain more than others and tend to be an overactive activation, of that one region. But as we do bilateral stimulation, so whether it's something like this or passing an object back and forth across our center line like this, walking, bilateral music, what have you, anytime we're cross-stimulating both sides of the body, we're cross-stimulating both sides of the brain. And it, again, can have a profound effect for the people it works for in terms of anything from just kind of resetting your filter and bringing you back to center, to calm, to relaxed, to profound trauma release and really some deep, deep healing. It's amazing. And I think it's another skill to just play with and know and have. One of the ways that I teach it when I'm teaching it to clients is that you can just pick up an object and pass it back and forth in your hands across the center line of your body. So this is something you can, plausibly do in public and just kind of pretend you're fidgeting with your keys or whatever you have in your hands. And while you're doing that kind of bilateral work, you can be kind of dialing yourself back to center. So I highly recommend you play with it. It's a great technique. It comes in really handy, and it's more powerful than people give it credit for. Talking way faster than I should be. Okay, next one. By the way, I should probably tell you guys really quick, a lot of these I actually learn in a paid course. So I'm actually giving you away a lot of content here that some of my teachers charged me to teach me, and and rightly so, because these are all life-changing skills. So while I'm just kind of casually rattling off and mentioning all these different techniques, please understand that this is something that I'm doing, to be generous, but there are a lot of teachers out there who would be charging you for this information. So anyways, enough said. I don't want to be too, bigging up myself too much here, but these are really powerful, valuable techniques. Whole careers and whole industries are built around some of these techniques. Let me see. So we did breathwork, bilateral, EFT. Next one would be havening. Now, havening is, I believe, a trademarked technique. I am not officially trained in havening, although I've watched enough videos and studied with people who are trained in it enough to know how to do it. Havening is, again, another one of these kind of more somatic, psychosensory motor forms of therapy where you're using a gentle form of touch, generally on the arms, on the palms, or on the face, that's very soothing, and it tends to stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system. It tends to apparently unwire some of the neural connections to the amygdala, the fear center in the brain, and start to break down some of these issues pretty powerfully. And my experience of it is that it's just such a wonderfully deep, powerful way of bringing ourselves back to calm and grounded and centered. And to be a little frank, if we are someone who maybe isn't getting enough touch in our life, healthy, safe touch in our lives, if we didn't get enough kind of loving, tender touch from maybe a mother figure in our lives early on, this is one of those techniques that can be profoundly healing, because it's essentially a form of self-nurturing, self-mothering, being very, very self-soothing. It's wild how something so soft can have such a big impact in the nervous system. But I think it's great. A lot of my clients have been really thrilled with it. Again, it's very calming, very soothing. So very useful, especially if you're triggered, you're overloaded, you need to bring yourself back to center, pulling yourself aside because it does look a little funny to do in public, and doing 5 minutes of havening will get you a very far way. Okay, let's get to the next one. Okay, one of my favorites on the list here is vagus nerve exercises. So there is a whole host, there's a whole, this is a whole modality of working with the vagus nerve, which is the center nerve in the body that is the longest nerve in the body, runs from the brain down through all the organs. It is essentially the highway through which, as far as I understand it, communication happens between the organs and the brain. So this is responsible for the condition of our nervous system in a major way. Now, this ties into a whole kind of therapeutic field of study called polyvagal theory, which I think is very interesting. There's a lot of great information around, pros and cons to it, but it really offers an interesting understanding into our evolutionary history, how our body is wired up, and how we release stress, how we release anxiety, fear, trauma from the body by stimulating the vagus nerve. So there are different techniques, whether it's self-massage techniques, whether it's things like humming, whether it's stretching and kind of physical exercises, again, very somatic. But often I've found when I'm like really triggered, doing some vagus nerve work, again, getting ahead of myself here, has been really healing, really powerful, very grounding, very calming. Sometimes it can bring up emotions and release a bit of tears or a bit of, whatever's there. But more often than not, I find it's just like all of a sudden, it's like my body just goes, oh, okay, I'm good. So that's another one to play with a lot. I would highly recommend not just playing with one or two techniques, but really starting to explore different videos about self-regulation via the vagus nerve and see if any of them work for you, because again, some of them work more than others. And again, if you're triggered and you're overwhelmed and you're like fixating on something or ruminating or you're spacing out and dissociating, and you take a few minutes and just do some vagus nerve massage or some vagus nerve breathing or some stretches or what have you, and that's all you have to do, and all of a sudden you're feeling mentally clearer, emotionally calmer, that's a win in my book. So yeah, check this out. Next on the list is one that is probably the most cliche recommendation here. And a lot of people tend to, especially if they're coming from a traumatic background or coming from, a mental health struggle of some sort, generally don't like to hear recommended, but it's one that if you get good at, has so much value for self-regulation, for bringing yourself back to center, for learning how to put things in the right place in your mind so that you're not overreacting to something or, being overly carried away by something. And that's meditation. Meditation is a profound tool. It's a tool that requires a little work. There's also a lot of misinformation about meditation out there, and a lot of false expectations, especially the memes and the kind of the cliches that you've probably heard, like the point of meditation is to stop your mind from thinking, which is, I don't think, accurate or true for most approaches to meditation. There are some that emphasize that, but that's kind of become a meme. That's kind of a what's the word I'm looking for? It's kind of like a caricature of what meditation really is. It's not really accurate or true. I've been a meditator personally since I was 15, so that's 30 years of my life at this point. I grew up with parents who meditated, so it's kind of always been there in my world. And I'll be real with you. I mean, I've done initiations and retreats and different forms of meditation over the years, and it's still challenging those first 10 minutes that I sit down all these years later. I wouldn't place an expectation on yourself that it's just going to be easy. But if you put in the work and you do longer than 10 minutes, you will get profound results that really help you to unwind and let go of a lot of the stress, the sadness, the anxiety, the fear, the overwhelm, and help you to learn how to process all these things better and be more present with yourself, more caring and compassionate with yourself as you do, depending on the meditation. I will say as well, obviously, since we're talking about psychedelics here, in the context of psychedelics, meditating is incredible. One of the most amazing experiences I think you can possibly have is meditating on psychedelics, to be brutally honest here. It's ecstatic, and psychedelics can really show you the potential of meditation outside of psychedelics. So if you meditate on psychedelics, you may discover that it's easier, that you're able to go deeper, that it's really incredible for you. And then that can be something that you import back into your regular meditation practice and just kind of stick with. I think it's important to realize that meditation is a practice. And it's important to realize that meditation is largely about training ourselves, in my opinion. There's many forms of it, but if you're doing like a classic mindfulness type meditation, training ourselves to not react or respond or get engaged or take action when our brain starts kicking up automatic thoughts and things that maybe upset us, trigger us, and start to just discover that our brain will automatically yammer on with content, whether we're trying to think or not, whether we're trying to do something or not. And the act of allowing your brain to try to pull you into reacting, but not reacting to it, is deeply healing and empowering. So I strongly recommend exploring meditation. It's a wonderful life tool to have. It empowers you in every area of your life. It's deeply good for your mental health. It can be really, really blissful and pleasurable, like to the point that I get it. There are people out there who don't want to do anything with their day but meditate because it feels that good. So you would never think that just sitting there doing nothing could be so incredibly rewarding, healing, and pleasurable, but it is. So it's got to go on the list here. It's an absolutely crucial self-regulation tool. Okay, this might be a little bit of an unexpected turn on this list because most of these practices are more traditionally, classically self-regulation techniques, maybe with the exception of meditation, which we could argue is really preparing for yogic practice. But this one, acupressure, is one that a lot of people wouldn't think of in terms of self-regulation. But I got to be honest with you, I have gotten so much mileage out of knowing just a little bit about different acupressure points that are used for anxiety, for tiredness, for overwhelm, for stress, for insomnia, for nausea, for whatever thing I might be dealing with. Being able to look up different acupressure points and apply them has been an absolutely indispensable tool in terms of calming, centering, coming back to a balanced, clear way of being. So I would highly recommend that you explore acupressure a bit. If nothing else, you can just Google in Google, or you can Google in YouTube something like acupressure for anxiety, or acupressure points for sadness, or acupressure points for overwhelm, etc., etc. And stuff will come up. Try them out. There's a little bit of trial and error. Learning how to locate the points on yourself, it takes a little bit of work, but my clients inevitably, when I show them an acupressure point or two, get so much relief and so much immediate out of it that it's worth putting on the list here. So I've included those in the playlist as one of the things. Again, it's a little unexpected, but I think, again, these are absolutely super useful tools in terms of bringing ourselves back to center, so that we're able to do the work, so that we're able to engage in the world, we're able to push through our blocks, we're able to develop the areas of our life we need to. Or if you're doing trauma work or emotional healing work, if you get a little out of sorts, acupressure really does come in super handy. So enough said on that. Okay, another popular one here that I haven't played with as much. I've done a bit, but it's not really one of my mainstays. But I thought I'd mention it here because it's one that a lot of people get a lot of value out of, is TRE, or trauma release exercises. So generally these are kind of like stretching positions, yogic positions, body postures that we put ourselves in, and then it kind of initiates a tremoring response from the body where our body starts to shake uncontrollably, generally because we're putting our muscles in a weird, awkward position where they can only hold that position for so long before they start to tremor. And that tremoring, if you just allow your body's intelligence to do its thing, can start to really release traumatic, emotions, memories, etc. Very powerful stuff. It's helped a lot of people's lives out there. And in terms of self-regulation, this is one of those ones that a lot of people do daily and get huge value out of in terms of keeping them grounded and healthy and not allowing their traumatic material to kind of build up and overwhelm them. So it goes on the list here. It's one I would highly recommend, and absolutely you should explore and play with. Even if you don't have trauma, let's just say you want to release a little stress. Maybe you're just kind of working a lot, or you're just kind of in a high intensity situation or phase or season of your life. This could come in really handy. So definitely check out TRE. Another one that's kind of weird but works really well, that is a favorite among trauma specialists and also a lot of psychedelic therapists, from what I've seen, is something called Brainspotting. So this is a really odd one where basically you get a sense for, following your finger around your field of vision until you find a certain spot where it makes whatever you're working on, whatever emotion that you're focused on, stronger. So there's little spots in our vision where if I'm thinking about an issue and I go, oh, it's strongest right there. And then I hold my eye there and continue to not move and just allow myself to hold my vision in a particular place. The idea is that it stimulates a particular region of the brain where maybe that issue's stored or held, and it starts to release it. So again, we're using the physical here to modulate or regulate the emotional and the psychological. This is something I've studied a bit, I've read about, I've took classes on and played with. It's doesn't work again for everyone, but for the people it works for, it works incredibly well. If you're feeling out of sorts, you're triggered, you're overloaded, overwhelmed, or if you're doing trauma work, again, I would I would start here. This, even if you're just like, I'm irritated, I'm tired, if you're just complaining in any way, try this out. It's really, really good. It really works for the people it works for. So Brainspotting would be another one. Okay, last one on the list here is one that I find among my clients is often kind of underrated. It's one that a lot of people don't seem to get a lot out of initially, or they kind of dismiss as not being as powerful as it is. But the science on it, especially if you go look at like Andrew Huberman's work, and he's talked about this quite a bit around it, is pretty clear that this is a very powerful way to modulate our nervous system and get out of fight or flight or out of sympathetic activation. And that would be peripheral vision. Simply becoming more aware of our peripheral vision, or what he calls panoramic vision, will start to give us a sense of kind of expansion. And that like very sensory physical expansion translates to an internal mental emotional expansion as well. That brings us back to a place of, if you can imagine the feeling of sitting on a mountaintop overlooking a valley, kind of just feeling that centeredness and that calm. Part of the reason you feel that way in that situation is because you're accessing more panoramic vision. If you think about it as well, let's say we're in a fight scenario or a hunting scenario or something where it's all about the moment and quick decisions and focus, we bring our vision down into a much narrower scope of focus, and that activates more of that fight or flight sympathetic nervous system. So this is directly tied to our nervous system to go focus or panoramic. Now, there's a lot of implications with psychedelics in terms of how we use our attention in the psychedelic space, and becoming aware of the periphery or an expanded awareness of the space around us, above us, below us, behind us, also has implications internally as well, right? So if we're just focused on one part of a vision versus aware of the entire space of a vision, that also shifts our nervous system in similar ways. So this is another one to play with and get good at. What I notice is that generally if I'm working with someone and I have them go into peripheral vision just to maybe calm down or center a little bit, it's not usually a profound thing at first, but if you hold your awareness of your peripheral for 60 seconds, 90 seconds, it will, again, just kind of mildly reset the filter. You'll notice yourself just like, oh, I'm good. It's not like an overwhelmingly ecstatic kind of thing. It's very subtle, but it's definitely present, and it's definitely a good tool. And sometimes if you're triggered, you're going about your day, you got things to do or whatever, sometimes all you need is a subtle shift that starts to reset the filter for you and bring you back to your more centered way of being. So peripheral vision, that's the last of these 10 here that I would recommend you explore and play with and check out for yourself. So let's go ahead and wrap this video up. All right, so there you have it. The 10 techniques that I think are a great place to start with self-regulation. Like I said before, there's more out there. This isn't the only 10 self-regulation techniques. Some of them aren't going to work for you as well as others. Some of them might trigger you too much or bring up too much and not really be useful in terms of centering. But I would encourage you to explore, play with, and try these on for yourself. And really, my intention with this video is just to kind of arm you with the information that these all exist without teaching you each of them and going into depth about all of them. Like I said, I do have a playlist here on the channel with all of this stuff, most of it, maybe not all of it, but certainly there will be all of it over time in the playlist. So I encourage you to just start Googling this, go through the playlist, search YouTube, start to learn these techniques and use them. That's the important part. Apply them in your life so that you can start to have a safety inside of your own skin, a way out of feeling overloaded and overwhelmed when it happens, because I know it does for a lot of us. So that's all for now. I hope you liked the video. If you do, do a favor, maybe leave a comment, like, subscribe. And again, I'm just kind of documenting this so that you have the resource of being aware of all of these out there. And so that's self-regulation for now. I'm sure I'll make more videos about it in the future. But in the meantime, thanks for watching. And I hope you take care and I hope you use these in good health. And I will talk to you soon.